I want you to picture a room in Vienna. It's dark, it's crowded, and the air is heavy. The date is December 5th, 1791.
And in the center of that room, on a bed, there's a man who's only 35 years old.
And he's dying, but it's not a peaceful, quiet death. Well, it's gruesome.
It's a complete systemic failure. If you read the reports from his doctors, and we have them, from a Dr. Closet and Dr. Saliba, they describe a body that has completely turned on itself.
At only 35?
Barely recognizable.
What do you mean by that? Unrecognizable how?
Swollen. The medical term they used was severe general edema. He's so bloated with fluid that he can't move.
He can't move.
I can't sit up. He can't turn over in bed. His sister-in-law later wrote that even the touch of the bed sheets caused him, excruciating pain. On top of that, he has a raging fever. He's covered in a rash. He's just slipping in and out of consciousness.
Those horror show. And then just before 1 a.m, silence.
At 12:55 a.m., he's gone.
And the story that follows is almost as tragic as the death itself, because there's no state funeral.
No. No weeping crowds lining the streets of Vienna, nothing like that. He's sewn into a simple linen sack, put into a reusable coffin, just for transport, and then he's taken outside the city walls.
And dumped into a common grave?
Effectively, yes.
Yeah.
He's just gone. No headstone, no marker. He vanishes into the earth.
It's such a bleak, anonymous end. But here's the paradox, and this is really what we're going to dig into today. That man in linen sack was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, the man who, in that short, brutal life, left behind over 600 works of art.
And these works didn't just influence music. I mean, they define what we think of as classical music.
It's the ultimate contrast, isn't it? You have this grim, frankly disgusting reality of his death, and then you have the music.
The music, which people always describe as, divine, the sound of heaven. It's so hard to reconcile the idea that the man who wrote the Jupiter Symphony ended up in an unmarked pit.
And that's the tension we're exploring, because when I think of Mozart, and I think most people are with me on this, I don't picture a guy dying of kidney failure in a rented apartment.
No, you picture the movie. You picture Amadeus.
Tom Hulce in that ridiculous pink wig.
Exactly. The high-pitched giggle.
The giggling man-child. The guy who's just a vessel. He's drinking wine, chasing women, and masterpieces just sort of fall out of him while he's playing billiards.
The vessel of God, who never really had to work for it. And look, it's a brilliant film. I love that movie.
Me too. It's fantastic cinema.
But as history, it's almost entirely fantasy. It created this powerful myth that has totally obscured the real man. It makes him seem like an idiot savant, when the sources show he was one of the most intellectually rigorous, hardworking people of his entire century.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to dismantle the pink wig myth. We're going to look at the actual sources, the letters, the financial records, the medical histories. We want to find the real Wolfgang.
The freelance entrepreneur.
The husband, the father, the guy who was navigating a gig economy 200 years before it was a thing.
We want to trace that arc, from the prodigy of nature being shown off in a London tavern to the hustler in Vienna. And we want to ask that big question. How did a human being with all these very human struggles manage to create something that sounds so perfect?
So whether you're a classical music buff or you just know Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, which, by the way, he wrote brilliant variations on Stick With Us, we are connecting the dots on the entire life of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart.
Let's start at the beginning. Salzburg.
January 27th, 1756. 9 get try to guess. A little apartment.
A baby boy is born.
Yeah.
And we all know him as Wolfgang Amadeus. But that wasn't quite his given name.
It was a lot more of a mouthful, wasn't it?
It was. The baptismal record reads, Johannes Chrysostomus Wolfgangus Theophilus Mozart.
Theophilus.
Which is Greek for loved by God, and Amadeus is just the Latin version of that. But it's interesting, he almost never called himself Amadeus.
Really?
In his letters, as an adult, he usually signed off as Wolfgang Amade with the French spelling. The whole Amadeus thing really became popular after his death. It sounded more grand.
He was the youngest of 7 children. But, and this is a really grim statistic that just sets the scene for that era, only 2 of them survived infancy.
That's right. Just Wolfgang and his older sister, Maria Anna, who everyone called Nannerl.
Imagine that, 5 children lost.
You have to think about the parents, Leopold and Anna Maria. The trauma of that, of watching 5 of your children die, has to shape how you treat the 2 that survive. You become incredibly protective, maybe obsessive.
Let's talk about the father, Leopold Mozart, because he's so often painted as this, overbearing stage dad, the Joe Jackson of the 18th century.
He was complicated. Leopold wasn't just some guy. He was a serious, accomplished musician in his own right. He was the deputy Kapellmeister, the vice director of music for the Prince Archbishop of Salzburg. He'd even written a famous book on how to play the violin.
So he was a big deal.
He was a respected professional. But he had also hit his glass ceiling. He knew he was never going to get the top job in Salzburg. He was ambitious, but stuck.
And then he looks over at his 5-year-old son.
And he realizes, my ceiling is my son's floor.
Right.
There's this incredible story. It's in all the early sources. Leopold comes home one day and finds 5-year-old Wolfgang scribbling on music paper. It's a total mess, ink blots everywhere. The kid is dipping the pen right to the bottom of the inkwell and then smearing the blots with his hand.
Just a kid making a mess.
And Leopold laughs at first. He and a friend think it's just nonsense. But then he actually looks at the paper.
He stops laughing.
He starts to cry, real tears, because he realizes it's not gibberish, it's a concerto, a perfectly structured, technically sound, and incredibly difficult piece of music that is completely impossible for a 5-year-old to write.
Wow.
And in that moment, Leopold's entire life changes. He decides his son is not just gifted, he is a miracle.
Okay, but if I think my kid is a miracle, I might, sign them up for some advanced classes. I don't immediately pack up the family and drag them across Europe for 3.5 years.
Well, that's where Leopold's sense of duty, or maybe his ambition, kicks in. He wrote that he had a moral obligation to proclaim to the world a miracle which God allowed to be born in Salzburg.
So he became a promoter.
He became the ultimate promoter. He packed up Wolfgang and Nannerl, who's also a brilliant keyboard player, by the way, and launched what we call the Grand Tour.
And this wasn't a vacation?
God, no. This is a grueling business trip. For years, they went to Munich, Vienna, Paris, London, The Hague, all over. And it was a spectacle. We have these flyers from London in 1765. Leopold is advertising them at a place called the Swan and Harp Tavern.
A tavern.
A tavern. And the headline on the flyer reads, Prodigies of Nature.
It sounds like a circus act. Come see the boy wonder.
It basically was. He wasn't just playing music. He was performing tricks. They'd cover the keyboard with a cloth, and he'd have to play blindfolded. Someone would ring a bell, and he'd have to name the exact pitch instantly. Perfect pitch.
It's impressive, but it also sounds, dehumanizing. He's an exhibit.
He was, quite literally, studied like one. There was a scientist in London, Daines Barrington, who was convinced it was a hoax. He thought Leopold was a fraud, and that Wolfgang was secretly a very small adult, a dwarf. So Barrington subjected the boy to a series of scientific tests.
He tested him? How do you test if a kid is a kid?
Musically at first. He put incredibly difficult scores in front of him to sight read. He asked him to improvise a song of love and then a song of rage. Wolfgang, of course, passed every musical test with flying colors. But then, and this is the detail that just gets me, in the middle of this intense scientific examination, a cat walked into the room. A cat. And Wolfgang, who was in the middle of playing some complex piece on the harpsichord, immediately stopped. He jumped off the bench and just ran over to play with the cat. He completely ignored the adults for a while. And Barrington wrote in his report that he found this very reassuring. It proved that Wolfgang was, in fact, just a normal little boy.
Wow. 1 minute he's channeling the music of the spheres, the next he's chasing a kitty?
Exactly. But you have to think about the toll this lifestyle took. All those years in cold, bumpy carriages, performing for hours, being poked and prodded by scientists.
It had to damage him.
Physically, for sure. He was constantly sick. Smallpox, scarlet fever, rheumatic fever. Most medical historians agree that these early illnesses did permanent damage to his immune system, probably his kidneys and his heart. It really set the stage for his early death.
And what about psychologically?
Leopold controlled everything. What he wore, what he ate, what music he wrote, who he was allowed to talk to. It created this deep dependency. Wolfgang never really learned how to be an adult in a lot of ways. He remained the eternal child.
So Leopold was both his creator
and his executioner, as one biographer put it. He built the genius, but he crippled the man.
So after years of this, they head back to Salzburg. It's 1773. Wolfgang is 17 now. And this is a very dangerous age for any child star.
It is. It's the cute factor problem.
Yeah.
A 5-year-old playing like a master is a miracle from God. A 17-year-old playing like a master is just a musician looking for a job.
And the job in Salzburg wasn't great. It wasn't a major cultural capital like London or Paris.
Not at all. It was an ecclesiastical principality ruled by the church. And the new boss, Archbishop Hieronymus Colloredo, was a completely different animal from the previous one.
He's kind of the villain of the story, right?
He's often cast that way, and for pretty good reason. Colorado was a reformer, but he was also a strict, no-nonsense guy. He hated long, elaborate church services. He wanted the music to be short, concise.
Which for a composer like Mozart, who's just bursting with ideas.
It's like being put in a creative straitjacket. It was suffocating.
And the pay was terrible. I looked it up. He was making 150 florins a year.
Which is nothing. I mean, to put that in context, later in Vienna, a nice coat might cost you 50 florins.
Yeah.
So his salary was basically 3 coats a year.
That's rough.
But the real issue for him was the lack of artistic opportunity. Salzburg didn't have a permanent opera house, and Mozart was obsessed with opera. It was the ultimate art form for him. He felt like he was rotting away.
So he tries to escape. 1777, he quits his job.
He does. He resigns and decides to travel to Paris to find a better position. But Leopold, the ultimate controller, doesn't trust him to go alone.
But Leopold can't leave his own job.
Right. So he sends Wolfgang's mother, Anna Maria, to go with him as a chaperone.
And this trip to Paris is a total disaster.
An absolute catastrophe from start to finish. The prodigy of nature is now just another talented young guy from out of town. The Parisian aristocrats aren't impressed anymore. He can't find a job. He sinks into debt.
And then the ultimate tragedy, July 1778.
His mother dies. She gets sick, probably typhoid fever, and dies in their little rented room in Paris. Mozart is 22 years old, he's broke, he's grieving, and he's completely alone in a foreign city.
And Leopold's reaction to this is just awful.
This is where Leopold goes from just an overbearing dad to something much darker. He writes these letters to Wolfgang, essentially blaming him for his mother's death.
How could he blame him?
He accused him of being irresponsible, of not taking proper care of her, of dragging her to Paris in the first place. He literally wrote, "You have your mother's death on your conscience."
That's just brutal emotional blackmail.
It is, and it's really the breaking point in their relationship. Wolfgang eventually crawls back to Salzburg, completely defeated. He takes another low-paying job with the archbishop, but the resentment is just simmering under the surface.
He hates Salzburg. He hates the archbishop, and he's starting to really hate his father's control.
It all boils over in 1781. This is one of my favorite moments in music history because it's so petty and human.
Mozart gets summoned to Vienna by the archbishop.
Right? Colorado is in town visiting the emperor, and he brings his musicians along, like in part of his luggage, but he treats them like servants. Mozart writes in his letters that he was forced to eat at a table below the valets.
Below the valet.
With the cooks and the footmen. And he's looking around Vienna, seeing how other musicians live with freedom and respect, and he is just seething.
So he tries to do a little freelancing on the side. He wants to perform for the emperor, for Countess Thun, to make some extra cash and build his reputation.
And Colorado forbids it, absolutely forbids it. He sees Mozart as his property.
The confrontation must have been huge.
Explosive. Mozart demands to be released from his service. Colorado calls him a villain, a scoundrel, a lousy knave.
And then comes the final meeting. Mozart goes to the archbishop's residence to hand in his official resignation.
He doesn't even get to see the archbishop. He's met by the steward of the household, a man named Count Arco. And Count Arco, according to Mozart's own letter,
What does he do?
he physically kicks Mozart out of the room. A literal kick in the arse.
You cannot be serious. The man who wrote The Marriage of Figaro gets kicked out of an office like a dog.
But that kick was the most important moment of his entire career. Because that was the moment he became free. He decided right then and there, I'm not going back to Salzburg, I'm staying in Vienna. He became one of the very first major composers to attempt a fully freelance career. He was betting on the open market, not on a single patron.
This is a huge deal. Before this, musicians were basically domestic staff. You wore a uniform, you followed orders. Mozart is trying to be an artist, an entrepreneur.
He's the startup founder of the classical era, and for a while, it works. Business is booming. This brings us to what historians call his golden years in Vienna, roughly 1781 to 1787.
So what's the business model? How does Mozart Inc. actually make money?
It's a few different revenue streams. First, he's a teacher. He gives piano lessons to the daughters of the wealthy aristocracy.
Okay.
Second, publishing. He sells his sheet music. But the big money, the real cash cow, was the third stream, subscription concerts.
Explain how that worked.
He would rent a concert hall, hire an orchestra, and then go around to all the wealthy families in Vienna and sell tickets in advance for a series of concerts. He was the producer, the promoter, the conductor, and the star soloist, all in one.
And he was good at it.
He was brilliant at it. The records suggest that at his peak, he was earning around 4,000 florins a year.
4,000 compared to 150 back in Salzburg.
That's a massive difference. He goes from poverty to being solidly upper middle class, and he starts living like it. He rents this big, fancy apartment near St. Stephen's Cathedral. He buys a billiard table, a horse, fancy clothes with gold buttons.
And he gets married to Constanze Weber. And the Weber family, that's a whole other can of worms.
Oh, the Webers are a drama in themselves. Mozart was originally in love with Constanze's older sister, Aloysia, who was a famous soprano. He was completely smitten.
And she turned him down.
Flatly rejected him.
Yeah.
So a few years later, he's in Vienna, he reconnects with the family, and he pivots to the third sister, Constanze.
I'm sure Leopold was thrilled.
Leopold was horrified. He thought the Webers were a family of low-class schemers trying to trap his son for his money. And to be fair, the mother, Celie Weber, was a bit of a piece of work.
How so?
She actually forced Mozart to sign a marriage contract, a legal document that said if he didn't marry Constance within 3 years, he would have to pay her a lifelong pension.
It was a shakedown.
It basically was. But here's the thing. Mozart didn't seem to care. He tore up the contract in front of Constance to prove he was marrying her because he loved her, not because he was forced to. Their letters are full of real affection and silly inside jokes. They were a team.
And while all this domestic drama is happening, the music is just pouring out of him. He writes the opera, The Abduction from the Seraglio, a huge success.
And this is where we get that famous story about the Emperor Joseph II.
The too many notes.
Right. The emperor supposedly comes backstage after the premiere and says, "Too beautiful for our ears and vastly too many notes, my dear Mozart."
What did he even mean by that? Was he just an idiot?
I don't think so. You have to understand the style of the time. It was called the style gallant. It was supposed to be light, charming, elegant. Think of a simple melody with a very simple accompaniment underneath.
Easy listening for aristocrats.
Exactly. And Mozart comes along and his music is dense, it's complex. The woodwinds aren't just playing chords in the background, they're having their own conversations with the strings. There's so much happening at once. To an ear that's used to that simpler style, it could genuinely sound like too many notes.
But the complexity is the whole point.
That's his genius. He was taking the learned style, the heavy, complex counterpoint of composers like Bach and Handel, and he was blending it with the beautiful, accessible melodies of the gallant style. He was creating this hybrid that had intellectual depth and emotional beauty.
And nowhere is that more obvious than in the piano concertos. He writes 12 of them in just 3 years.
Between 1784 and 86. It's an insane creative burst. And these pieces, they really redefine what a concerto could be. Before Mozart, the orchestra in a concerto was often just there to back up the soloist. In Mozart's concertos, the piano and the orchestra are equal partners. It's a dramatic dialogue, a conversation. And he was performing them himself, conducting from the keyboard, improvising huge sections on the spot. It must have been absolutely electric to witness.
And right in the middle of all this success, in 1784, he joins the Freemasons.
Yes, and this is a really important piece of the puzzle. Freemasonry in 18th century Vienna wasn't some shadowy cult. It was basically a club for Enlightenment thinkers.
So scientists, artists, aristocrats.
All meeting to discuss ideals like brotherhood, reason, equality, charity. It gave Mozart an important social and professional network, but it also deeply influenced his worldview and his music. Pieces like the Masonic funeral music, and especially the Magic Flute later on, are just filled with Masonic symbolism.
So it seems like everything is perfect. He's rich, he's famous, he's married, he's incredibly prolific, but then the wheel starts to turn.
1787 is the pivot point. Things start to get darker.
The first big blow is his father's death.
Leopold dies. And even though their relationship was so strained, this was a massive psychological blow. Leopold was his teacher, his first critic, his anchor to the past. Now Mozart is truly on his own.
And the music starts to change, too. He begins this incredible collaboration with the librettist Lorenzo da Ponte.
And they produce 3 of the greatest operas ever written, The Marriage of Figaro, Don Giovanni, and Così fan tutte.
Let's talk about Don Giovanni. It premiered in late 1787. It's called a playful drama, but it's not very playful, is it?
Not at all. The opera opens with the main character committing a murder. And it ends with him being literally dragged down to hell by a walking, talking stone statue. Yeah. The music for that final scene, written in the key of D minor, is some of the most terrifying music ever composed.
The analysis I read said his operas are really psychological dramas.
They absolutely are. He uses music to reveal a character's inner thoughts. If a character's lying, the orchestra might play something that undermines their words. He differentiates his characters through melody and rhythm. He understood human psychology in a way no composer had before him.
But while the art is reaching these incredible new depths, his finances are falling off a cliff. What happened to the 4,000 florins a year?
The economy tanked. In 1788, Austria went to war with the Ottoman Empire. And this was a disaster for anyone in the luxury goods business, which included Mozart.
Why?
The aristocrats, who were his main customers, all left Vienna. They either went to their country estates to save money, or they went to the front lines to lead their regiments. Inflation soared. The market for concerts and music lessons just dried up.
So his subscription concerts.
He couldn't sell enough tickets. There's one concert series in 1789 where he gets exactly one subscriber. One.
And he and Constance weren't exactly big savers, were they?
No. They lived a very lavish lifestyle. They had the expensive apartment. They had servants. They sent their son Carl to an expensive boarding school. They were living paycheck to paycheck, but the paychecks had been huge. When that income stream stopped, they hit a wall. Hard.
And this is when we start to see the famous begging letters.
They're painful to read. He's writing to his friend and Masonic brother, Michael Puchberg. He's constantly asking for loans. If you could just lend me 100 florins, I'll pay you back next week. And then next week comes and it's, I'm so sorry I can't pay you, but could you possibly lend me another 20?
It just shatters that myth of the effortless, divinely inspired genius. He was worried about making rent.
He was stressed about money, just like the rest of us.
Yeah.
But here's the absolute miracle. The stress, the debt, the grief.
Yeah.
It didn't stop the music.
No. In the summer of 1788, right in the middle of this financial crisis, in the space of just a few weeks, he writes his 3 final symphonies.
Numbers 39, 40, and 41, the Jupiter. It's probably the most astonishing burst of creative energy in the history of art.
People always talk about the Jupiter Symphony, especially the finale. They say it's this pinnacle of Western music. But honestly, if you're just a casual listener, what are you supposed to be hearing? Why is it so special?
Okay, that's a great question. To get the Jupiter, you first have to understand what a fugue is.
Which is not a state of amnesia.
Slaps. No. A fugue is a very old, very strict, very mathematical way of writing music. Think of it like a complex, layered conversation. One voice starts with a theme, a musical idea. We call that the subject.
Okay.
Then a second voice comes in, repeating that same theme, but at a different pitch. And while it's doing that, the first voice starts a new melody that meets perfectly around the second one. Then a third voice comes in, and a fourth.
So it's kind of like a round, like row, row, row your boat, but way more complicated.
Infinitely more complicated. It's incredibly difficult to do well. Now, usually a composer writing a fugue is juggling one, maybe 2 main themes. It's musical chess.
Right.
In the finale of the Jupiter Symphony, over the course of the movement, Mozart introduces 5 separate, distinct musical themes.
5 themes. He's setting the table.
Exactly. You hear them all individually. They're catchy. They're memorable. And then in the final section of the piece, the coda, he does the impossible. He plays all 5 themes at the same time.
All 5 at once.
Simultaneously. The violins are playing one, the cellos are playing another, the flutes are on a third. It's a 5-part contrapuntal web. On paper, it should sound like a train wreck. It should be chaos.
What it doesn't.
No. It sounds like pure incandescent joy. It sounds like the heavens opening up. He took the most rigid, academic, mathematical form in music and made it sound effortless and beautiful. It was his ultimate statement. He was synthesizing everything that had come before him.
And he did all that while he was broke and begging for money.
It's just unbelievable.
So that brings us to the final year, 1791. And the popular myth is that this was a year of decline, that he was sick and depressed and washed up.
That's the romantic tragedy version. But the reality, when you look at the records, is that 1791 was actually a comeback year for him. He was incredibly productive. The war with Turkey was ending. The economy was picking up. And he was starting to find his financial footing again.
He writes The Magic Flute,
which was a gigantic runaway hit. And look where it was performed. Not at the fancy court opera, but at a popular theater in the suburbs. It was entertainment for ordinary people. It had comedy, magic, special effects. Mozart was connecting with a mass audience again.
He also writes an entire opera, La Clemenza di Tito, for a coronation in Prague, and the Clarinet Concerto.
The Clarinet Concerto.
Oh, yeah.
It's one of those beautiful pieces of music ever written. It has this quality of sad resignation and autumnal feeling. It feels like a farewell, even though he couldn't have known it was one.
And then, of course, there's the Requiem. This is where the legends go into overdrive. The mysterious stranger in a gray cloak who commissions a mass for the dead.
And Mozart becomes convinced he's being poisoned and that he's actually writing the Requiem for his own funeral.
So how much of that is true?
Well, the messenger was real, but he wasn't some supernatural omen. He was just the employee of a guy named Count Walsegg.
And who was he?
Walsegg was a wealthy, eccentric amateur musician who had this very weird hobby. He would secretly commission works from famous composers, copy them out in his own handwriting, and then have them performed at his castle, pretending he wrote them.
So he was a plagiarist? It wasn't a message from the beyond? It was just a rich guy trying to commit copyright fraud?
Precisely. He wanted a requiem to commemorate his late wife. But Mozart didn't know any of this, and he was already starting to feel sick, he was overworked, and his mental state was fragile. He genuinely told Constanzi he believed he was being poisoned. He even mentioned aqua tofana, a famous slow-acting poison from Italy.
So the paranoia was real, even if the cause was imagined. Let's talk about that final illness. By November 20th, 1791, he's confined to his bed.
The decline is very rapid. The symptoms we talked about at the beginning, the high fever, the vomiting, the rash, and especially the swelling, the edema.
His sister-in-law Sophie left a description, right?
She did. She said he was so swollen that he couldn't even sit up without help. His limbs were just useless.
But his mind was still active.
Almost to the very end. The day before he died, December 4th, he had a few friends come to his bedside. They propped him up with pillows, and they sang through parts of the unfinished Requiem. He was trying to sing the alto part.
Wow.
The story goes that when they reached the Lacrimosa, the section about weeping, he just broke down completely, crying, because he knew he would never finish it.
And then hours later, he's gone. We have to address the big conspiracy theory, the one from the movie. Did Antonio Salieri poison him?
No, absolutely not. Categorically no.
So that's pure fiction.
It is.
Okay.
Salieri was the imperial court composer. He was powerful, successful, and respected. He had no professional reason to kill Mozart. They were rivals, sure, but they were also colleagues who respected each other's work. The rumor only started years later when Salieri was an old man suffering from dementia and started making strange confessions. But there is zero historical evidence to support it.
Okay, so if it wasn't poison, what did kill him? The sources mention a pork cutlet theory.
Yeah, that's the trichinosis theory. It's a parasitic disease you can get from undercooked pork. In a letter, Mozart mentioned eating some delicious pork cutlets about 44 days before his death, which fits the incubation period for the disease. And the symptoms, fever, pain, swelling, are consistent. It's plausible.
But it's not the leading theory.
No. The leading theory comes from modern epidemiological research. Scientists went back and looked at the official death records for Vienna in the winter of 1791, and they found a spike in deaths, especially among younger men, with the exact same symptoms as Mozart, fever and severe edema.
An epidemic?
Exactly. They believe it was a severe streptococcal infection.
Like strep throat.
A very bad case of it, yes, in a time before antibiotics.
Yeah.
And an untreated strep infection can lead to something called acute nephritic syndrome, where your own immune system attacks your kidneys.
And the kidneys fail.
The kidneys fail. They can't filter fluid from the body. That causes the massive swelling, the uremic poisoning. It fits every single one of his documented symptoms perfectly.
And the medical treatment at the time probably made things worse.
Oh, it almost certainly did. They bled him. Bloodletting was a standard treatment. Here's a man whose body is already in shock from kidney failure, and his doctors are draining what little blood volume he has left. It likely hastened his death.
It's just so tragic. And let's clear up one last myth about the burial, the pauper's grave.
This is one of the most stubborn myths. He was not buried in a pauper's grave, which implies he died in poverty and was thrown away. He was buried in a common grave.
What's the difference?
Under Emperor Joseph II's reforms, which were designed to be more hygienic and egalitarian, this was the standard burial for most of the middle class. It was an individual plot, but it was unmarked, and the plot was reused after about 10 years. It wasn't a sign of poverty or disrespect. It was simply the law.
And the story that there was a terrible storm so no one could go to the cemetery?
Also a myth. Weather records from the Vienna Observatory for that day show it was calm and mild. The storm was invented later to make the story more romantic and tragic.
So he's gone, and Constanzi is left a widow with 2 young sons and a mountain of debt. But she doesn't fall apart.
Constance is the unsung hero of this story. She immediately becomes this incredibly savvy businesswoman and the fierce guardian of his legacy. She organizes memorial concerts, she meticulously catalogs his manuscripts and sells them to publishers for top dollar. She pays off all the debts and ends up dying a wealthy woman.
She secured his legacy.
She absolutely did.
Yeah.
Without her, a huge amount of his music might have just been lost to time.
And his influence on the composers who came next was just Immense.
Immediate and overwhelming. Beethoven, in his early years, is almost living in Mozart's shadow. Schubert wrote in his diary about hearing Mozart's music, calling them magic tones that showed him a brighter, better life.
And we still talk today about the Mozart effect, the idea that listening to his music can make you smarter.
Which is, often exaggerated. Listening to a sonata won't magically raise your IQ. But the core idea has some merit. The structural complexity of his music does seem to engage parts of the brain related to spatial temporal reasoning. But the real effect of his music is something deeper.
It all comes back to that synthesis, doesn't it?
That's the key. He took the intellectual rigor of the German tradition, the counterpoint, the fugues, and merged it with the effortless melody and emotional directness of the Italian tradition. He can make the most complex music sound simple. He can make the deepest sorrow sound beautiful. He captures the entire range of human experience, from the dirty jokes in his letters to the divine terror of the Requiem.
So what's the big takeaway from all this?
For me, it's that genius isn't some magic gift from God. It's work, it's resilience, it's showing up to write your symphony even when you're sick and in debt.
Mozart wasn't a vessel. He was a craftsman, a brilliant, flawed, hard-working human being.
Here's a final thought to leave you with. Mozart died when he was 35. He was just beginning to explore new, darker, more complex harmonic languages and things like the Requiem. Now think about this. Beethoven lived to be 56. Haydn lived to be 77.
What if Mozart had lived another 30 years? What if he'd lived through the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, heard Beethoven's Eroica Symphony, and decided to respond to it? What would a 60-year-old Mozart have sounded like? It's the greatest what if in the history of music.
It really is. We were robbed of a romantic era Mozart.
It's a tragedy, but we're also so incredibly lucky to have what we have. If you want to explore more giants who shaped our world, make sure you subscribe to History Titans. Like this video and share it with a friend who thinks classical music is boring. We bet this story will change their mind.
Absolutely. Thanks for the conversation.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.